Hello there. Today I'm tasting a wine from Bulgaria, and it's a little bit of a surprise for me. I was in a wine shop and I saw this label for Domaine Bessa Valley's Enira 2018, and you'll notice there's a crest on the bottom there, and that's the crest that you'll see on the wines from Comte Stephan von Neipperg, who's a quite successful and influential Bordeaux producer. And it turns out that he is one of the investors and one of the driving forces behind Domaine Bessa Valley in Bulgaria, along with Dr Karl Heinz Hauptman and various other investors, but they're the two sort of principal driving forces behind the estate. It's a 140 hectare estate. Somebody called Marc Deworkin is involved as a consultant, and he's one of the more influential consultants in this part of the world making wine. The first vintage for the estate was 2001, and at that stage they were producing wines from Bordeaux grape varieties. They had a whole range through Malbec, Cabernet Franc, as well as Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. These days they have Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot with a little bit of Petit Verdot, but also have planted a fair amount of Syrah, as I believe they found that sort of suits the soils better. Soils here are classic clay limestone soil, and the region sits between the Rhodope Mountain and the Maritsa River. So the vineyards are somewhat in the shadow of the Rhodope Mountain. The situation here is about 100 kilometres southeast of Sofia, just to the west of a town with a name that will be quite familiar to anybody who was drinking Bulgarian wines back in the 80s and 90s, and that town is Plovdiv. Winemaking know-how that's obviously come from Bordeaux. I mean, Stephan van Neippberg, his most famous chateau there in Saint Emilion is Canon la Gaffelier. He also has La Mondotte and Clos de l'Oratoire. So some really impressively consistent modern Bordeaux chateau in Saint Emilion. The know-how that's coming here is seen in the way that these wines are made. Firstly, the fruit is hand-picked, but then it's sorted quite carefully on sorting tables. In fact, they're using vibrating sorting tables. Most of the fruit is kept whole, and it's chilled down to 10 to 12 degrees C for a 5 to 7 day pre-fermentation maceration. So as whole berries doing this, that's almost a sort of a carbonic maceration style of winemaking. Fermentation is started by the adding of a yeast culture, and the ferment is allowed to warm, and in its first stage is kept relatively cool. It goes for the first 5 to 10 days at somewhere between 24 and 26 degrees C. Once that stage of fermentation is completed, it will then spend 10 to 14 days doing a hot maceration, so it's allowed to warm up for the end of fermentation to allow a vigorous ferment to completely finish converting the sugars to alcohol cleanly. The wine's fermented in concrete tanks and does its malolactic conversion there as well. It then goes into oak for a year. It's going into French oak barrels. I would assume those are barriques, although that's not noted in the information I've been given. I've seen various different blends for this wine, but the one that I think is correct is the one I've taken off the estate's website. That would have this as being 66% Merlot with 20% of Syrah, and then the balance, the remaining 14%, being Petit Verdot. The oak used is older oak. There is a reserve wine above this in their range, so presumably that receives the new oak. This gets about sort of 10% of oak that's had 1 use, about 40% of oak that's had 2 years use, and the balance has had 3 years. The wine is blended and then filtered into bottle. The notes suggest that it's vegan friendly, so there should be no fining. What I'm hoping with this wine's pedigree is that this is going to provide it with great value drinking. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? My first impression is the colour. The colour is a deep, dark, slightly purple ruby red. I really can't see down through the wine to the stem of the glass, so that's completely opaque. The aromas. The aromas of rich, ripe plums. There's a little bit of spiciness, perhaps a hint of savoury. There aren't obvious oak notes at this juncture. Swelling it, the wine is 14.5% according to its label, and there are quite viscous tears running down the sides of the glass there. So, as you'd expect, the wine probably has plentiful extract and it has relatively high alcohol. So let's taste and see what we make of it. It's a dry red, but as is typical for the wines you see from Stephan van Neippberg from Saint Emilion, there's a lovely juicy richness, and to me that's a pointer that the acidity is good and fresh. There is a tiny cedary note behind the fruit, so I'm starting to see a little bit of the oak influence there. But really, the first thing you're getting is a sort of a very juicy, ripe red cherry note, and then it's becoming more sort of black cherry. There are slight hints of black olive savoury notes behind that, but mostly this is sort of juicy black fruit, and that black cherry is the main component there. Maybe there's a touch of dark plum, almost gaining a little bit of juiciness there, but I still think the sort of the freshness of the cherry is where I am with that. In honesty, the alcohol doesn't seem particularly hot. You know, the wine has some weight on the palate. There's a reasonable amount of really quite fine tannins. They're not producing a particularly astringent dryingness, but there is a slight sort of dry, spicy note to the back of the tongue. I think there's something about the texture of the wine has a lovely smoothness that's stopping it from seeming too drying, unpleasantly drying. The acidity is giving nice length. There's a sort of a fresh, still fairly juicy fruit to the end of the wine. The wine is perhaps relatively simple. Once you've got past that juicy fruit, there's not a lot of the sort of the cedary note behind it. I'm not getting lots of sort of exotic sweet spice there from the oak, but it has a good density. It's, you know, medium to full bodied. There's a fair weight there. There's a nice structure. I think that's quite an elegant wine. The sort of wine that would be interesting to follow for a few years and see how they manage to improve the style as they're working with the estate for longer and getting more used to it. I don't particularly see the Syrah standing out. There's a slight meatiness to the back palate, I suppose, but it's not hugely evident. It's mostly that sort of lovely, juicy black fruit, black to red fruit, and very fine, supple tannic structure. So, yeah, really interesting wine. Certainly demonstrating the sort of potential that Bulgaria has always had for producing high-quality wines. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you find this video interesting. If you've learned something or if you find it entertaining, please do hit the like button, do share it with your friends. We'd love to hear your comments, both about the wines, the videos. We'd love you to sign up and follow us on YouTube. That would be great. But most importantly, I hope you'll manage to find time to join us for another tasting really soon. Bye now.